Welcome back everyone, this is Lapidosum and it's finally time to talk about Pan's Labyrinth. Now I know I've kept you waiting with this video for over half a year now, I think. I don't know when the first time I mentioned it was, but I've been working on it for over half a year now. And it's one of my favorite movies, clearly, among many others. It just fills me with so much pride and hope and nostalgia, and it makes me glad to be a human. And there's actually very few movies that have that effect on me. And it was on my second watch that I began to realize that there is more to this movie than I initially thought, even though it had its effect on me my first time of watching. But I picked up on some visual cues on my second watch, and I just happened to have a lot of time on my hands, over 6 months. So I decided to do a deep dive into its visual language and analyze, um, just try to analyze it as a whole and hopefully take something away from it and perhaps understand it better, because there's clearly a lot that I didn't have a complete grasp on, not even after my second or third time watching, so I needed to sit down and think about it, and by doing so I also did some repaints. As you know, I posted the first couple of them, the first few. There I think I mentioned that my original goal was to study composition and lighting and colors they used, because it's a beautiful movie, clearly, and I don't know shit about composition and lighting and colors, so I wanted to do that. But I ended up achieving more and less at the same time, I guess. I actually didn't manage to focus on composition as much as I wanted to, but I did find out some interesting stuff about the colors. And well, the part about me growing and becoming a better artist through this journey, it it happened. It clearly happened, and I love doing it. And now I barely feel like the same artist I was when I started. And yeah, I don't know if anyone cares about a movie that came out in 2006, but I'm young and I'm going to talk about it. So, again, this is Lapidosum, and you're watching my 5 months long, 5 months, not over half a year, sorry, 5 months long journey with Pan's Labyrinth. So the first scene clearly shows Ophelia bleeding out. I remember on my second watch, I actually managed to convince my mother to watch this with me by telling her it's not that scary. And then we started watching it, and the first thing she saw was a kid bleeding out, and she made some sarcastic comments about that. And it's true, I think that's the effect the movie was going for. It's immediately almost obvious that it shows the end of this girl's story, and it robs us of all hope right away that about this child's fate. And it just in general fills me with the idea that a child's violent death is one of the worst things that can come to happen on screen and on this earth, or the way it is portrayed, or the music playing in the background. I don't know, something just makes me feel that way. And you can see right away something that I noticed in a lot of these scenes is that the canvas or the screen is actually sliced vertically, because it's horizontally a very wide screen. I mentioned it in my previous smaller videos on Pan's Labyrinth. It is a 1.82 to 1 ratio. Um, so it's pretty wide, and it often does the horizontal slicing of the composition. And here we can see that Ophelia's hand, that is the ultimate foreground, if I can call it that, is inside of the bricks or underground, if you look at it that way, whereas the rest of her body is above the bricks or on the other side of them, still alive and breathing. But also remember that this is a vertical slice of a clearly horizontal scene, so it looks like not like we're alive and inspecting her from the outside, but like we're lying next to Ophelia, and it this whole positioning makes us want to understand her story and how she came to be this way. It also raises this sense of sympathy in us, as if we are dying with her in a way, or we will, who knows. It also gives us a sense of instability, like the future is not set in stone, but that is very vague and it's hard to decipher. And also, if you know that a scene is horizontal and you see it vertically, you will most likely still perceive it to be horizontal just because you see the girl laying on bricks, and you know rationally that it should be her laying there, so your mind corrects it kind of, and you can't really tell if, I mean, unless you pay direct attention to whether it's horizontal or vertical, you can't really tell which way it is. And I couldn't either at first because I wasn't paying that much attention right away. Now, about my speed paint of this one. You might notice that part of it is gone, and that is my mistake. It's just beginner's error. I probably paused the recording to grab something to eat and then forgot to turn it back on. I can't say for sure how long the missing shots took, but it had to be at least an hour, given how much progress I've made in that gap. Also, it's obvious from the speed paint that I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't even begun using different layer types at this point yet, and it is deeply flawed, this piece, but it felt like it was among my best at the time, which clearly shows my level at the point of starting. And for someone who started out as a portrait artist as a child, I horribly messed up the facial anatomy, probably by leaning too heavily into a style that wasn't mine yet and I haven't even tried it before. But yeah, it looks like one of her eyes is like half a meter apart from the first one. I'm sorry. And also, I went way too cartoony with the expression. It almost reminds me of Scooby-Doo. It's weird to see this one as the second because I thought this was after the scene in the forest, but I guess not then. However, I mentioned in my first video about this one the patchiness of the texture, and I still stand by that. It doesn't look much like healthy vegetation to me. It looks more like rust or mold or rot in the placement and quality of these darker spots, and therefore an otherwise painterly picture becomes unsettling in a way. It sends the message to us that something's not right in the world, or in this part of the world at least. There's something infecting and consuming on no end. The mill is just as patchy, showing perhaps that whatever is inside is either the source of this evil or a byproduct of it, but definitely not a safe haven in any way. It is clear from this one, if you're watching my speed paint, that I never was a fan of painting landscapes, and it shows. I had to start over like 3 times. The liner didn't help. I had to start experimenting, but nothing helped at all. Even the other landscape painting videos I looked at, like tutorials, they all relied on bigger shapes, and I tried to own that and apply that to this scene, but this whole texture that I just mentioned and the general lack of stability, aside from the cars and the mill, of course, I felt like I had nothing to hold on to. Nothing made sense. The road was sometimes the same color as the grass, then the grass was sometimes the same color as the road, and the forest in the background doesn't even look like a forest. So yeah, it drove me insane. This was the first piece that did that. There will be a lot of others to come that did drive me insane. You'll probably like those more. I could only vaguely convey the feeling of the original shot by creating this lukewarm slop, and as I said, nothing makes sense, no definition outside the cards. It's just extremely clumsy. I was also proud of this one when I made this, naturally, because it was my first real landscape since like grade school, maybe high school, and I hate looking at it now, obviously. This one is, I believe, from when Ophelia's mother gets sick in the car, so they have to stop and let her in. I mean, let her out, which is exactly when the whole thing with the statue happens and the stick bug, I mean the fairy, gets awakened through the statue, or at least gets notified of the princess's arrival. And let's talk. So the vegetation finally looks like vegetation. It is gorgeous. The way sunlight shines on it in similar patches that the shadows were in the previous one. It feels alive and wild and not made for humans, but wonderful in its own way. It is perfect for something like the statue and the stick bug to live in. And this scene is sliced vertically again. It took me a while to notice this time, as I first thought that the car was the foreground, but actually it's not. It's just the point of action. I missed for the first time the stick bug. I mean the fairy melting into the trunk like an actual stick. Um, this one is in general just much more pleasant to look at than the last one. There's a comfortable amount of contrast between light and shadow, a little less than I painted, but it's still lively and it conveys that feeling of when the sunlight hits you so hard it feels like it could dry out any wetness from you and your clothes. It's that very pleasant warmth. And this is exactly when I noticed something about the colors. So far they've only used about a third of the hues on the color wheel, at least in the scenes that I repainted. Probably in the whole movie as well, but naturally I didn't analyze every single scene as much as I did these ones that I picked out. And I believe this very controlled range of hues is part of the reason why everything feels so bland and claustrophobic almost. So far, ranging only from turquoise to mustard yellow or this like gross orange shade, which is weird because blue is a hard color to escape and red is basically a cheat code when calling for attention. The sky in this one still looks bright without any blue used or added. Yeah, hint, you can't even see the sky, you can just see the sunlight interacting with the vegetation below and stuff. And the lighting, oh boy, another round of insanity. As you can see, I had no idea how to do any lighting, any kind of lighting more complex than basic moonlight from behind on a humanoid object, you know, the kind. And sunlight seeping through canopy is gorgeous, and I've been wanting to learn to do that for so long. I love it whenever Noir does that too, until I actually had to try. After a few errors, I watched a tutorial on lighting in general and followed that with some adjustments to make it really look like sunlight shining through the canopy, as I mentioned. And I finally started using the overlay layer type, and I need it. I desperately need it. I don't even know how I managed to do any sort of lighting before that without the overlay layer type. It's it's so easy to use, and it it just it can really enhance the perceived quality of your skills in lighting. So highly recommend if you're like me and you haven't started using them yet. You can probably tell that I had a bit of a routine by this point, but clearly not stable and not effective enough. In the base shapes are still awful, and I ran the extra mile of correcting them on every single layer instead of just using okay base shapes. I could have just I could have just used a different brush that wasn't so heavily textured, and that I wouldn't have to go back to correct over and over again. But I also needed some time to figure out that more grainy textures just work better for me, and at least I got a little more confident in leaving my line art behind. You can see some sloppy brush strokes if you look hard enough still. They are from Sketch, I believe, and they are green for some reason. I don't know. Yeah, this is the first one that I do not hate, not even today. Like, I don't love it anymore, but it's fine, I guess. So this is Ophelia running off into the forest because she has everything she could possibly need in the mill and around it, but she needs to follow the stick bug into the forest because she's 12 and she's acting like a 12-year-old. So I mentioned in my previous upload of this one, we're running out of previous uploads by this point. I'm sorry, I promise. I think this might be the last one. Okay, so I mentioned that the volumes of her dress coincide with the background, um, as in her the brighter values of her legs coincide with the lighter patch on the ground in front of her. Her jacket with the darker volumes of the ground way ahead beneath the trees that is already in shadow mostly, and her black hair with the line of trees in general that is completely obscured from sunlight through the thick canopy. So she doesn't just run into the forest, she melts into it. And this is her first moment of freedom in the movie, if you think about it. This is one of those that I wasn't even satisfied with when I completed it. I started experimenting with textures finally, but that didn't. I mean, you can see the texture of the wood and the cobblestone that I used on the building. That's fine, I guess, but I couldn't really make it look cohesive with the forest and the ground and just the whole thing in general. Like if you look at her, for example, her shape, I used much slimmer brushes on her clothes and her whole character, and I thought it would just make her look more human, but actually it just made her look more out of place. And yeah, this was definitely a good lesson to learn early on. The base layer is still awful if you look at it, especially the fucking rock by the building. I don't know how I thought that it was a good idea to make the rock look like that. It just nothing made sense. I kept trying to stick to the reference strictly, but it wasn't working out because the base shape wasn't like the base shape in the reference. Yeah. Also, maybe it would have looked more cohesive if I didn't underuse textures so much. Like, yeah, I used them on the building, but other than that, the stones look exactly the same as the tree trunks in over the horizon, which look the same as her dress and her hair almost. So, yeah, nothing really stands out aside from the building that is not actually important in this scene. Also, the canopy is just awful. I'm sorry, I hate the canopy on this one. I really thought it would be easy if I just used the right textured brush, and I used a base layer and a darker and a lighter layer on top of that, but it really wasn't enough, and I just wanted to stick to that so strictly, and I kept ruining it. I tried to make it easier to read and just be more conscious in general, but it didn't work out, and it looks way too foggy, and hey, at least I finally left my line art behind for good, even though it clearly didn't do this one a favor, but it had to be done. It had to be done. It had to be done so that my next paintings will get better, and they will get better. Trust me. This is one of the worst ones. So we see the captain and his crew, you, um, talking about other adult stuff like genocide and beating down any form of resistance against their fascist regime. So, just basic activities for adult men to enjoy around a dining table at night. For me, it looks like the men and their belongings, which I forgot to paint by the way, their belongings, they ruin what would otherwise be a perfectly symmetrical picture. Their blue uniforms contrast against the warm hues of wood and fire, and despite the fire being a very stable and bright source of light, or it's supposed to be at least, the light that shines upon them, it comes from above and it's white, so it's not quite moonlight either. It's just, you could either read it as some appearance of the Holy Spirit or whatever, but for me it feels more like not even a scene that would otherwise feel comforting and homey and just pleasant to look at can actually feel homey when people like them are around. People who won't listen to intuition or love or emotion at all. They will just listen to orders. For me, that is signified by the white light. that is so uncomfortable to see coming from above. It feels like the light of the fire is being wasted, just like how the food that they eat is being wasted because they take way too much for themselves, way more than they would need, while everyone else basically is starving. On this one, I actually tried to make the texture more balanced, if you can tell. This may be where I picked up my few fixed sizes for my main brush, if I remember correctly, but you'll probably see from the video. I had one for roughly about 100 pixels, maybe a little more, one for 51 pixels, one for 26, and the smallest size was 10 pixels for my main brush, at least. Not my sketch brush. My sketch brush is just a sketch brush. I didn't really care about that one. But yeah, here's where I started limiting myself, hoping that maybe I could thrive more easily within these boundaries that I set for myself. Maybe if I don't feel too overwhelmed by the sheer amount of possibilities regarding the amount of brushes and sizes and colors. And I already did that with brushes when I decided to only use this couple or these few brushes that you can see me using these past few paintings. Hint: I'm going to keep using them for the rest of this journey because I love them. And also, I mentioned before how the color palette in general has been limited so far in this movie. So yeah, I feel like it was hard at first to get used to these limitations, but it's beginning to do me some favors at this point, I feel like. And now that I'm fully used to these sizes, I can't even imagine any other way. But here, before getting used to it, obviously, it led to some barely human and barely existing faces. It looks ugly and I don't like it anymore, but it's pretty much what I was going for. I didn't want them to look human. Just like how I didn't perceive them as necessarily human in the original scene. Like, there's light coming from behind and there's light coming from above. And the whole scene is pretty well lit despite the way it looks at first. And still these men's faces are obscured for some reason. Also, I somehow made the fire still look like it's from another dimension, and I'm sorry. The lighting was already messy when I found this scene, but I sucked at adapting it too. I will admit to that. Mercedes and the doctor share a conversation that Ophelia accidentally eavesdrops on. That took a while to pronounce correctly, but it's fine. So, both have worried and mostly hopeless looks on their faces. Um, well, Mercedes does. The doctor just uh, conveys that in body language because you can't see his face, obviously. But then I accidentally made Mercedes look more pissed than trouble. Also, my mom mistook her for Villa Valo. Facial anatomy is still clumsy, as you can see, and trying to find my style. I also didn't know how or whether to even lighten the whites of her eyes, or how to go about the eyelashes and the eyebrows without making the darker area beneath her nose look like a mustache. And you can see that she did end up having a more ape-like face. I accidentally twisted the actress's natural features into that of something less human, I think. I also don't like this one. I may have also been a little too careful with the deep shadows and too vague with the background. There's too much shadow, but it's not dark enough, making it look bland and just lack contrast in general. There's also too much texture, but too little definition. The lighting is unclear. It doesn't look like torchlight, though it could or should, I guess. There is no clear direction the light is coming from, and it's just obvious that I copied the scene without really understanding it. Also, it's a problem because it's not warm enough this way to be tied to scene 7, which is about to come up soon, where this supposed light seeps in through the door onto Ophelia's face in their bed, and it looks warm. It looks like actual fire. Also, the doctor's beard and the back of his neck is just super weird and looks like it's not even in the same art style as Mercedes, which is messed up because the brushes and colors are nearly identical down to pixels. So, yeah, I don't know how I messed this one up so bad. And this is scene 7, as I mentioned before. This is Ophelia and her mother laying in bed, as Ophelia is restless and her mother looks half dead, further amplified by the warm glow from outside reaching Ophelia's face but not really her mother's. Her mother's is more or less only illuminated by the moonlight coming from her side of the bed. I mean, her side of the room onto the bed. You get it. Also, it's interesting how one of Ophelia's eyes reflect the orange light, whereas the other reflects the blue one. It it feels unstable, and again, both of her mother's eyes are closed. This is where Ophelia gets torn into. I think that's what's being communicated here. With keeping Mercedes' secret that she just overheard and her journey beginning into the labyrinth away from humanity. I also don't want to pretend like I know too much about art because I don't, but it reminds me of the blue and red cloth on Jesus in the Last Supper, signaling his duality of divine spirit and mortal flesh. This already brings some hope into the first shot, scene 1 that I made, planting the idea that bleeding out is not the end for her in our heads. And here I finally felt confident in myself. Definitely had my usual limits by this point. Base layer is still off but doesn't look like a kindergarten bathroom anymore. I clearly stopped using those patchy, uncertain, messed up bases, and I instead use some more stable ones. They're still a little textured, but I didn't go all out on the texture, only on their hair. Um, I think the fogginess did it a favor for once, being a pretty hard to make out scene as it is. So you have a harder time finding the mistakes that I did make. Also, textures are tiny and they took an awful amount of time to make, but they are not too detailed to be overwhelming. And I feel like I finally managed to make them support larger shapes instead of confuse them. And I was actually really proud of that. I still don't like looking back at it now, obviously. I did for a long time, since this was, I believe, the last one I finished before Christmas and family happened. Then I was delayed further by writing a comic for my best friend's birthday, and I don't mind, I really don't, but I was so looking forward to continuing this journey with Pan's Labyrinth, and this is the one that I kept looking back to. Like, this is what I'm going to continue, and this is the amount of progress I've made so far, and oh my god, just imagine how much more I can make. It really filled me with a lot of hope. I got drunk on power. Also, I realized that the brush I was using on everything up to this point, other than the base layer, proved to be the perfect base layer brush for their hair. I mean their specific texture of hair. It felt like the discovery of the century for me at the time. Faces still look weird, obviously, especially Ophelia. She looks like an ugly baby looking back at her. But this was my first proof that whatever I was trying to do had the potential for something beautiful and greater than myself. And it gave me the space to begin healing and improving. So here we see Ophelia's little brother inside the womb, looking as calm as any not fully formed human can. As soon as Ophelia starts telling him a story, when her mom just told her that he was restless, which I believe further proves that Ophelia's creations or presentations, either way they are stems of her soul, are not of any mortal. Her power comes from her love and her understanding of the story she tells, which can be broken down to her just being a smart child, a smart child in general, but also it's her disobedience that gives her this purity, that gives her the almost spiritual nature of her power and her significance. You can see me breaking my back around the end, trying to fix the proportions, because this was my first time painting an embryo, probably my first time painting a baby at all, and I didn't know what I was doing again, but at least I had my techniques now, and my limitations, and my layer types, and at least I could just follow the same path that has proven to work for me, even though it didn't fully work out on this one. And I believe this is the first actual appearance of the color red. Ophelia's blood in the first scene is more black or deep purple-ish, um, and I don't think it ever comes back, the color red, I mean this intense. Barely any orange is present in the scene to ease it, which is especially overwhelming because red is very intense and it is usually advised to be used in only small quantities to easily call for attention, not in like a whole design, just like in its highlights or where you want your viewers to look first. That's why it's almost unpleasant to look at this scene, because it demands all of your attention all at once, everywhere. We perceive the color red to be physically closer to us than it actually is, and then we perceive any other color, really. Closer in space, I mean. That was probably once a defense mechanism against danger that comes from blood, poisonous bugs and plants and etc. You know, it usually signals danger, and Del Toro literally slaps us in the face with it. All of this intense color for Ophelia's cute story for her little brother doesn't make much sense, and it leads our attention to a part of the movie that I believe it is to show that the boy is more flesh than Ophelia, perhaps, or that her impending death does is nothing compared to his pre-life state. I mean that in a way that even when she inevitably dies, she's going to she's going to have more soul and more hope than he does currently as an embryo. Or perhaps that he lacks part of what she possesses, or that he has something no one in the outside world has, not even Ophelia. There is the direct love of a mother, perhaps, the ultimate freedom within flesh, or the bliss of existing with no outside effects, needs, or thoughts or memories. Either way, he's a human being as far from being a human as possible, if that makes sense. Not in the same way as the captain is, but more so in the way of he. We know nothing about him, just like how Ophelia doesn't know him. We don't know if he's going to follow orders or not, because even if he does have a conscious mind already, he cannot receive orders. He can't receive any input. He's he's free to do whatever he wants and whatever his body lets him. He can't kill himself. He can't hurt himself, and no one else can hurt him either. Basically, mostly. And his mother loves him in the way that she once loved Ophelia when Ophelia was in the womb, but in a way that she cannot love Ophelia anymore when Ophelia wakes up in the middle of the night and she needs comfort. She needs someone to tell her that it's okay, to soothe her fears away. She doesn't have her mother, but even when she's asleep, her mother is still there for her son, because she cannot do anything else than to be present for him, even as he's hurting her constantly. Also, he just looks like an odd little frog, but most infants do, so I don't mind that part that much. So this one includes the captain sitting in his office, and by that I mean the mill, probably staying up late working. The mechanism behind him looks like clockwork almost. That's kind of could be considered as foreshadowing, I guess. It would put him inside the clock, not in a position of ownership over it. Moonlight bleaches all that's not reached by his multiple lanterns, and you can see that all of them barely light a corner of the space, not even a full surface. That is a natural for lantern light, as opposed to the obscured and broken, not even full moonlight. But here the turquoise moonlight eats up every other light source, even on the floor, making the captain's attempts to illuminate the space seem useless, almost counterproductive. Either that or warmth itself just really hits people like the captain, as we saw it in the scene where he's standing above the table with the others. Wood and stone dominate textures here, mostly large surfaces. Otherwise, I would have gone insane when painting them. Also, I need to mention that this was my first and only time tracing during this project. And I know I swore that I wouldn't when I started this project, but this time I gave up for the greater good. That was not spending weeks on a single shot. I attempted to do it without tracing at first, but nothing was lining up, nothing was the right size or in the right spot, nothing made sense. And I knew doing the lighting on such an elaborate indoor shot would already be enough of a challenge, and it has been, and it was. So I thought maybe I could skip the part of just grinding into this internal design that I can barely see and I don't understand. You know, I'm sorry. So if you've seen the movie, you'll recognize this as the scene when Ophelia asks the stick bug if it's a fairy and shows it a picture in a book of a fairy to illustrate her question, to which the stick bug turns into the creature on the page. One of the possible explanations is that it was a fairy already, just pretending to be a stick bug in front of adults and other humans, which I don't think so. I think it's more that it transformed to meet Ophelia's wish or expectation. It's been around her even before that, but it didn't transform until it was asked to. And it can only communicate with the phone, not with Ophelia, showing that she's still partly human, though it almost certainly understands human language, only maybe in the way that Ophelia speaks it. Ophelia was terrified moments before that and still is to a degree. And still her first instinct is to try and communicate and look for magic in anything she can. Also, I'd like to mention that this is not the first time she proved to be the possible princess. The first one being, I believe, when she placed the eye into the rest of the statue in the forest. That was the first thing that woke the stick bug in the first place, or at least caught its attention. But this action of Ophelia probably just makes the stick bug or the fairy even more certain that she is the princess. And it also shows that she has direct effect on her surroundings without being as aggressive as the captain. You can also see that the warm glow from before is gone completely, and this scene is lit by nothing but this bright moonlight. By this point I probably had my layer types and a more or less stable process. By this point I attempted to do a shortcut in the text, if you can tell. I basically just drew some straight lines and I erased and blurred parts of them to make them seem like letters on a page. But it looks a bit weird, but I would probably still let it slide. I don't have a better shortcut for words on a page. Anyway, at this point you can see that I had no separate base for different objects, just textures and an overlay layer to clarify, and I actually liked the way this one turned out. It wasn't that much of a challenge. If anything, this lack of a base reminded me of the way I used to draw and paint traditionally, using minimal colors and just a very limited amount of brushes and other tools to work with, and I loved it. I actually built a lot of my skills on top of those limitations, so I was figuring the same thing out digitally by this point, I think. So this is the first time the fawn is seen and is recognized by us as a living creature. Brilliant custom design and acting. It is both plant-like in both appearance and movement, but not in an uncanny way, not to me at least, more so in a weird way. He really does look like a piece of the forest come to life. I mean, come to a humanoid form of life, if that makes sense. And it's just gorgeous. It's gorgeous to look at. It pulls me in hard. Even if I hadn't seen any of this movie, I would see this costume design and this actor's movement, and I would want to watch this for 2 hours at least. And I couldn't convey it as well as I wished, but his expression here is curious and hopeful, the way he's lit by the moonlight especially, which is especially weird because if you've seen behind the scenes videos of this costume and the actor, you know that this face wasn't that easy to move around, I mean the mask, so to still manage to convey emotions with it just with body language and the way lighting hits the face is just baffling to me. But naturally beneath this curious and hopeful emotion there's a creepy monster's base, and it feels like one of those, cute monsters, if you know what I mean. Stuff that's scary but you also just want to hug it, I guess. When I showed the finished piece to my brother, however, we agreed that this wasn't the regular phone. It was, or pen, I mean, we call it phone, and I would think that a mythological creature called faun would be called phone, even in English, because phone fits into the English language perfectly. But that's why I'm calling it phone. But yeah, I remember every now and then that it's called pen in English, which is just dumb to me. Whatever. So we agreed that this wasn't the regular phone, it was the one that sells illegal Slipknot merch at the Nyíregyháza market. And I might find a picture to deepen your understanding of this Hungarian archetype. If I don't, just subtract the phone from this piece, and whatever is left is the guy that sells illegal Slipknot merch at the Nyíregyháza market. I would also like to mention, going back to the moonlight, that he's at the bottom of the labyrinth here, and he's hit by the same intensity of moonlight as Ophelia was with the fairy in her room. Make of that whatever you will. I guess it depends where the moon exactly is on the night sky, but I don't know which one would be weirder, if it was brighter or darker than the room. But I guess that room doesn't have that big of a window, and this is literally out in the open, just very deep. So I guess it would make sense for this one to be brighter, but I don't know. I'm not sure about this one. Also, I picked up a new combination of techniques, which is, if you've seen my older art, and by older I mean 2018 Tumblr days level of old, cross hatching used to be my default. I picked it up when I was around 13, and I kept doing it all throughout high school, and naturally I tried to leave that behind once I switched to digital, because I already had so much. As I mentioned before, it was overwhelming how many different textures and colors I had to me at the time of switching, and it just didn't feel right to duplicate or add even more techniques on top of that. I mean, even more textures on top of that with different techniques like cross-hatching. So I had been suppressing that urge up to this point, which is when I tried it, and it seemed to work out after a couple of attempts, so I kept doing it, and I actually like the way it looks. And given that at this point I was only using a single brush in a few different sizes, it already felt like it could definitely fit into that limited list of tools I could allow myself to use, and it felt great. So Ophelia finds the crescent moon-shaped birthmark the phone told her about. Her mother outside is waiting for her to put on her new dress, telling her she'll look like a real princess. The mother doesn't know, of course, that she is a real princess with or without a dress, which she's now finding out. Ophelia is filled with hope in sunlight and steam, and it's hard to see at this point how such a bright story could end with her bleeding out. The bathroom wall, that is, the background is barely defined. The lights are not too intense, not in color nor in contrast like before. The only point calling for our attention is the birthmark, as her gaze is fixed upon it in the mirror, and also her hand stretching her skin point towards it while making it more visible by stretching the skin. So there was absolutely no point in making it glow too, but I did anyway because I felt like it, and I guess it's fine. I wouldn't do it now probably because there's really no point. Um, I was enjoying using the overlay layer a lot, and I wanted an excuse to create an interesting lighting scenario, but yeah, it was completely unnecessary. As you can see, I used the same shading technique I took from cross-hatching, but with much more moderation than with the phone, either on the sides or the darkest areas of her face, or in her hair, as you can see. And yeah, I'm happy that at least she doesn't look like an ugly baby anymore, but an actual preteen girl. And by this point, I had decided that I wouldn't include every shot I found on film grab from this movie, but only the ones I deemed the most important. Um, yeah, side note, I don't know if I mentioned in this video before, but I take all my screenshots from film grab for this one at least, and I will for about 36 other movies that were on film grab, and I have some screenshots I want to paint from them, so stay tuned, I guess. So alongside the ones that I had already done unfiltered, would have been 25 paintings at this point, but it later turned into 23 after some reconsideration, and that's how I'm going to end up with a video that is about 3 hours long, probably. I don't know yet. I'm in the middle of recording. Anyway, next one. This one is the beginning of the first trial, when Ophelia finds the tree the story told her about. Also, I'd like to note that she can read it in the forest, so animals clearly don't count as people when she wants to read the book. So I guess you can take it that they are not corrupted, unlike humans, human adults especially. But anyway, once gorgeous, the tree and all that inhabit it now suffer from a single creature. The toad takes more than it needs, more than it could ever need, and doesn't contribute anything. That is a very clear metaphor for the captain. She only looks at the tree once, and she knows its story with understanding, making no judgment or searching for any information that she doesn't need or that is not given to her willingly. She doesn't hesitate to enter despite knowing there's danger ahead. She does take off her new dress though, clearly having respect for her mother, but not letting herself be controlled by that respect, or not letting that respect turn into fear. Also, she has respect for the mother and therefore the dress, but she doesn't have respect for such materialistic things as dresses, clearly. And that balance is a skill most adults, by that I mean mortals, struggle to find, but to her, as a child or a princess, it comes naturally. The original lighting is also bland on this one, but guess who took that for nothing? I created needless contrast, making the forest appear more idyllic and the tree appear more ominous. It looks less like a dying tree and more like a gateway to hell. And if that was the only difference it made, I guess I would be fine by it. I don't know if I like what the change entails, but it I've made some worse changes and mistakes in the past. What I do hate, however, is the texture of the canopy. That is even worse than in scene 4. Yeah, what was I even thinking? It looks like ants in the sky. That it's way too hard to read, way too uncertain and grainy for a canopy. Actually, never mind, the whole forest looks like a ditch. Only the sky is bright and the unexplained yellow glow coming from behind, it just doesn't make any sense. There is no clear light source. I mean, could it be fireflies, but like at noon? In the middle of the forest? No, it looks like nothing. It looks like magic where there's not supposed to be any magic. And it makes no sense. Still, that's my biggest issue with this one. The captain and the doctor have a conversation outside about the stage of Ophelia's mother. They only ever refer to her as your wife or my wife. The doctor tells the captain that it was a dumb fucking idea to make her travel this late in pregnancy, to which the captain says that a boy is supposed to be born where his father is. Red flags. Obviously, he knows it's a boy without anyone telling him. That is made clear even by the movie itself. He's not willing to make any compromise. He finds his lust for power more important than his wife's well-being, and he gives more importance to a supposed son yet to be born than the fully fleshed out person carrying it, probably not even thinking of her as a fully fleshed out person, definitely not thinking of her that way, and just being confidently wrong in general. This might also be where he tells the doctor to save the son instead if he has to choose between them, but that might come in later in the movie on second thought. Yeah, I think it's later, but still. The captain is already known to be a monster by this point. This only reinforces it and puts Ophelia's mother in an even worse position. In terms of my repaint, this is another least favorite. I like the way I did the textures, though. The way wooden doors going from dark to light towards the center, stone path becoming smaller and less detailed and gradually turning into mud and then grass in space as it goes on into the center of the image. Also, I like the way I made natural light seep through the fog in a sickeningly cold hue. It really it feels like when you wake up one morning and you're like 9 years old and you have a throat ache, and yeah, it probably just reminds me of that for some reason. Anyway, I fixed the canopy. Finally, the canopy looks like a canopy, and I am so happy. This is the first time I managed to do it. Now, on to the parts that I hate, which I hate a lot. The foreground is so off. Just something about the way light hits the front of their uniforms makes the whole shapes look anatomically incorrect. And it's especially bad because they are clearly a point of focus brought out by contrast. They are the only pitch black areas in a bright but dimly lit scene beside the frame, that is the wooden gates. And if you look at any other part of the painting, um, it is darker on the outside, and it's going to more and more lighter volumes towards the inner um, the middle section, except for these two men. And in my case, these two men don't look like two men. They look like two kids who dressed up as ghosts for Halloween, if they also had some hormonal dysfunction. In this one, the phone comes to visit Ophelia in her room since she hasn't completed the second trial all day. She tells him that her mother is sick, to which the phone shakes off as an excuse, but gives her a mandrake root and a recipe to cure her mother's condition nonetheless. It's, for me, that is part of the proof that it's not just an excuse. Alongside the fact that the book itself drew her attention to her mother's sickness that morning, with blood filling the page in the shape of a uterus in the bathroom just as her mother started bleeding unnaturally. It freaked Ophelia out, and she was taken to a separate room. She may have started coming to terms with the possibility of her mother's death when Mercedes sang her the lullaby, but she still has some time until the full moon, just like how she still has some time to either become the princess fully or become fully human and grow up. And obviously, the death of a loved one can make someone grow up extremely fast, especially if it's a parent dying. The moonlight is colder and not as saturated as before in this scene. Ophelia looks almost as white and sick as her mother did in scene 7. She may have turned a little more human due to her love for her mother twisting into a sense of fear and growing stronger. The room is filled with dusty clutter, not meant for a child's room, but accurately representing the mind of an adult, I think. The phone looks horribly out of place, unlike in the Labyrinth, which he clearly appears to be a part of, or a manifestation of. I think this one turned out fine. I mean, I made the pen's ties way shorter than they actually are for some reason. I don't know, I wasn't paying enough attention to anatomy, clearly. Also, I made Ophelia look remotely Asian, on top of being ghostly, and I'm sorry, I don't know how I did that or why, but you can see me making the same mistake with Ophelia, somehow always almost turning her Asian, but barely managing not to. The next night, Ophelia manages to get instructions out of the book for the second trial and does as she's told, opening a gateway to the pale man with her chalk. The instructions are much more clear and more elaborate than in the first trial, including don't eat, don't stay too long, open that specific door and no other, let the fairies guide you, and of course she fails all of them and still manages to escape. She does eat from this table, but not the captain's dinner party. She stays long enough for the door to close, but draws a new one on the ceiling. She listens to her intuition instead of the books or the fairy's guidance. She proves exactly that she is capable of not following orders directly and managing just fine on her own, further proving that disobedience is a virtue. This twisted logic is hinted at, I believe, in the way the light that shines directly above um, does not reach the floor the way it, it naturally would, but looks tilted instead, like sunlight hitting through the window early golden hour, as if light in this dimension didn't travel in a straight line. We see red again, and it's downright disgusting in this context, nothing like the womb was, but it is perhaps a direct opposite to that. The little moonlit square in the far end of this hallway, with Ophelia peeking through it, is like a little oasis in the sea of orange and red. Ophelia herself looks like the only pure thing in this scene, which deepens ties to the other dinner scene with the captain, where her mother filled that same role. As you can see, I struggled a little to get the textures across, but I may have nailed the lighting. I'm not sure. The construction makes even less sense than originally, but I try to understand and follow the guidelines even in the dim lights. Also, I may have made Ophelia too much of a pale blue dot, um, like a faceless doll, like the pale man, but instead of appearing faintly red with blood, she appears faintly blue with moonlight. Um, and if we try to understand this in the same context that I used to understand scene 7, the warm and cold glow hitting Ophelia's face at the same time, it, I guess, is trying to say that the pale man is a lot like Ophelia, but it is more flesh, whereas Ophelia is more soul or more spirit, and that alone makes a huge difference in them as entities. The pale man at the head of the table is awakened by Ophelia eating a couple of grapes, pushes his eyes into their sockets on his palms, and looks at her. It's no secret that he was made to look like a man who was once morbidly obese but lost tons of weight overnight. Makes him look super gross and terrifying. It's one of my favorite monster designs in general. The way his skin is stretched out and discolored, it it really does feel just wrong in general. He can't see and act at the same time, given that his hands are on his palms. So it's either one or the other constantly. And this choice in his design is reinforced by his movements and actions. He is played by the same actor who plays the phone, I mean the pen, by the way, totally in human movements. But that was to be expected. He has wide nostrils on no nose at all, pretty much. Um, and that's interesting because noses are an important factor in whether or not we find a face attractive, which he clearly has no need for. But also the elongated nature of our nasal canals and the fleshiness of the nose play a part in the way we speak and the way our voice sounds. he makes this screeching, scream-like sound. If you've seen the movie, you know that. Um, so there's clearly no attempt, willingness, or ability to communicate. Tiny ingrown teeth sit in a deep, lipless mouth, which, on the one hand, further complicates communication. On the other hand, they are just not fit for biting. And when he does, it's like cutting someone in half with a great sword. It's possible if you're insanely skilled and strong, but a great sword is not a fucking slashing weapon, making the process of biting longer and even more painful for both parties. Long, nailless fingers, blackened and sharpened on the edges, they reflect light differently on the ends, reminiscent of the eyes of an infected snail. I don't know what else they look like, his fingers, I mean, or why it shines like that, but yeah, it further separates him from any regular human. Basically, every part of this creature is repulsive and just something you wouldn't want to be in the same room with. Ophelia, being fearless in the way of a child, doesn't seem too bothered by his presence. Obviously, she's a little thrown off because he's unfamiliar, but she doesn't take much interest in him once she notices that she can communicate with him, and especially after what the phone taught her about him not being human. Um, but even as she goes on to the three doors, she doesn't like keep glancing back at it anxiously or feeling particularly uneasy, or she's not showing it at least. Not until it awakens, at least. The paintings show him or it eating its prey, mostly naked children, I guess, upside down head first. The paintings that she notices, by the way. He's It is a physical manifestation of fascism. He lines up perfectly with the captain. The whole following orders blindly, it's literally incapable of acting any other way. He either sees or acts. I mean, he sees or touches. He can do both at the same time. That is exactly perceiving an order and acting it out. And there's no room for nuance or adjustments or listening to multiple parties, even. He consumes innocence and wonder. He owns food and wealth it doesn't need and doesn't indulge in, but won't let anyone else have it either. Ophelia had to eat from this table and not the captain's. And let me explain that. So she's associated with the captain. Therefore, eating from that table would have meant she was enjoying the benefits of his monstrous regime. Eating from this table, however, means the opposite, even though the order she was given by the phone, so to say, was not to eat from this table particularly. She, first of all, disobeyed the order, which is important, and second, she showed that she didn't agree with the payman owning all that when it didn't need it, and she's she's not like it being able to see and act at the same time. She sees the food, sees that it's not eating, and notices her own hunger and acts on that hunger, letting it override the order she was given. Absolute cinema. But we have to go on because this video will already take forever to make, and I used a lot of the same techniques I picked up with the phone, I really needed it here for all the cast shadows and tiny skin folds as opposed to the larger shapes, so it wouldn't just look like a pile of soggy skin, but like an actual messed up humanoid underneath all that soggy skin. I don't know what my idea was with the stained glass behind it. Parts of it look cool, I guess, but it mostly just makes no sense, like many other things in this project. Anyway, the blocky. I still love the blocky nature of this brush, and I especially like the way it looks here. By this point, I was very strict on myself about going from large to small, which definitely did my art style a favor. And just not keeping that rule has been a common mistake in my art most of my life, and this piece shows what it's like when I do not make that mistake. And yeah, I'm still proud of this one. I may have accidentally referenced this line before, thinking I've spoken about it already, but probably not, because it probably hasn't come up until this point in the movie, but I'll talk about it now. Anyway, so this is where the doctor saves the captive during a break in his questioning by giving him a dose of poison that kills him instantly. So he doesn't say anything else about the resistance and he doesn't have to suffer anymore. He was only allowed near him to fix him up so he wouldn't bleed out prematurely. The captain obviously is baffled by this. He doesn't get why anyone wouldn't listen to him. And to this, the doctor says, because following orders blindly is something only people like you can do, or something along those lines. And then he turns to leave, only to get shot in the doorway and left to die in the mud. Very strong scene. Yeah, everything I said about the payman and the captain and the toad being three manifestations of the same entity, the same um, regime, so to say, is is brought is turned up to 100 in this one, and it's beautiful to watch. You can see that the captain and his crew are hard to make out in the evening clouds as individuals wearing the same uniform, even if in slightly different ways, further obscured by the shadow of their umbrellas, um, blocking out all light that would be coming from above, which is all the light in this scene is coming from above. Um, they appear to be more like a single creature of many heads and legs rather than four or five soldiers. The form of the doctor is also hard to make out as human since only the color of his skin and what little is visible from his shirt differs from the mud beneath it in volume and saturation at least. It shows his purity and insignificance at the same time, I believe. Everything looks almost unnaturally dark for such a white sky, even if cloudy. Um, it's like if the sky was at 5 o'clock in the evening, but everything beneath it was at like 7. So, you know what I mean. It's that time of the day when stuff starts being harder to make out, even though it's not that dark yet necessarily. There are a few streaks of pale light on the buildings that don't really make sense to me. That might be my fault, but it didn't make sense to me in the original screenshot either. I don't know why light is reflected in that way in particular. I don't. Maybe some of the buildings from in front of these ones reflect light in their windows in that way, but I don't know. I don't think there are any buildings in front of this one. I think there are only tents, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I don't know. Also, this streak of light, one of them, only hits the front of the captain's body and the top of their umbrellas and the back of the furthest general, further deepening their appearance as a single blob. And you can probably tell this was one of the longest ones to complete. I knew it was enough to detail textures in only a limited area of a surface, and the human eye will naturally fill in the blank spots as also being part of that texture. So if you have a brick building, you don't have to paint every individual brick, you just have to build a certain number of them before people start seeing it as its own fully brick building. You know what I'm talking about. But Lapidosum thought, no, I'll spend over 3 hours drawing everything, every single brick, every piece of trash, and every block of cobblestone, every plank of wood, and so I did. It was therapeutic, at least, kind of. I could say that. I hope you're satisfied with it. I'm not. And also speaking of going from large to small, I feel like there's too much large and not enough small here, except for the fucking building textures. Other than that, it still feels unbalanced for some reason. The texture of mud still looks like shit. I only used a texture brush for that, and it shows way too clearly. I didn't think I even distorted it. Maybe I did, but I didn't go back to edit it as much as I should have. And also the texture brush I used just didn't look like mud at all. I just wanted something to snap onto it and make it look better, but it made it look worse. And in turn, it doesn't even feel like part of the scenery, given that every other texture was fully hand painted by hand. No textured brushes used, and that was a bad idea. So the captain is in unspeakable agony, as he should be, stitching up the wound Mercedes gave him with the knife she always carried in her dress hidden. Before he got this car, he captured her. He was about to question her as well. He expressed that he can't believe it was a woman who almost destroyed him, to which she just answered that that is exactly how she could get behind him and stabbed him. Thank God. This is probably the most satisfied I've ever felt watching someone get stabbed. Not that I watch many people get stabbed, but he now suffers the consequences of underestimating a woman. And he still doesn't learn, given that he keeps underestimating Ophelia, not just because she's a girl, but also because she's a child, and sees her vision as foolishness and her disobedience as weakness. It's clear from the lights and the mirror that he's in his office, so to say. Yeah, I gestured some air quotes here until I realized that you can see me doing gestures, whatever. Light is reflected 100 times over on his sweating face, even more than it would be in the mirror, deepening our understanding of his pain. It hurts to watch, but it's the kind of pain we can't help but love. Half his face is obscured by shadow, but sweat shines even there, unlike his half-open eye, which seems to reflect no light at all, and the other one is closed, I believe, but neither of them reflect any light. That's the point, making him... Even now he appears barely human, especially if we take the gaping hole into account that elongates his mouth into that twisted half smile, almost. It's almost as if he was happy in a way, satisfied, perhaps, that he got what he deserved, which wouldn't be much of a stretch because we saw him fantasize about cutting his own throat in this same mirror before, showing that his desperate need for control and will to prove himself come from a place of deep insecurity and self-hate. He really is pathetic in every sense of the word. His lack of eyes may also deepen his connection to the pale man, but I don't think I have to elaborate on that anymore. I've spoken a lot about the pale man and the toad already. Probably not so much the toad, but the pale man definitely. Um, yeah, if you think about it, he is another trial, so to say. He is the actual villain of the third trial, if the first two trials were the Toad and the Paleman. I may have overdone the technique I mentioned on him this time. Lines just got messy and overused, losing some of their weight because I overused them. Around this time, I think exactly on this painting, I started using a simple airbrush to erase parts of my wheel where the highlights are. I didn't see too much of a difference at the time, only that it served not to make the whole piece look any more busy than it already was. And I felt like I needed that at the time, but now I'm not so sure. It gives the painting a more dreamy appearance and clearly limited my ability to put weight into the contrast between the veil and the between the veiled and the unveiled parts. In case I haven't explained it before, the veil is this final darkened layer I put on top of all the others, filling it with one darkest color, setting the translucent quality to about 75% or so, and erasing the parts of it um, that are highlights on the painting to guide your eyes. That's what I call the veil. And yeah, I use my standard brush most of the time up to this point to erase parts of the veil, but that added extra texture and it sometimes made the paintings look more busy, which I sometimes felt like was a mistake, but now I actually quite like it that I did that way. Maybe because I don't have the process in my mind that much anymore, so I don't see myself layering texture on top of texture on top of texture. Instead, I just see the final product, and the final product is fine, in my opinion. Yeah, here I use the airbrush, and I regret not using my standard brush anymore. That's exactly how pieces like 17 were born, and yeah, I'm sorry. I messed this up deliberately, kind of. So, the final trial. Ophelia does as she's told at first, and takes her brother into the labyrinth for the pen, only to back out as soon as she finds out that he wants to draw blood from him. He says that he's not going to kill him, just cut him for a drop, and Ophelia does everything she can to keep that from happening, going as far as to say she's willing to sacrifice her entire kingdom for his safety. As she's arguing with him, the captain, who's just being drugged by her, takes her brother from her and shoots her dead. He stumbles away as the realization dawns on her. She lost her mother, her brother, the phone, her kingdom, and now her life. We finally see how her story could end so horribly. Her stubbornness led her to this fate. Again, the figure of the captain, out of focus, slumped over, barely able to walk, fades into the background as Ophelia's vision gets fuzzy alongside ours, making him hardly register as even remotely human again. Her expression as she stares at her blood-stained hand is not angry or painful like the captain was when stitching his wound, just startled, disenchanted, but accepting, kind of, showing that if she was given the chance, she'd make this exact choice to protect her brother all over again. Um, this felt like an important revelation on my first watch, but it keeps feeling more and more insignificant the more times I watch this movie. Um, the captain doesn't see the phone, either because he's not schizo, like Ophelia, supposedly, or because he's not enlightened. And I prefer the latter, because the fact that not everyone can see the phone could be a defense mechanism or simply the lack of a certain ability on the human's part. Either way, the lack of sensory input alone doesn't prove non-existence. I'm saying that while not being religious, by the way. Also, she looks like nothing more than moonlight. Her blue tint is only broken by her blood, which she is cleansed of here. She not only had to sacrifice her own blood before, rather than that of an innocent, um, she had to bleed for one last time, so she could never bleed again, therefore finally leaving her mortal nature, the mortal nature of her flesh behind. Her dying means that she cannot die again, becoming more than flesh. And had she been unwilling to do so, and had she not been killed, she would have bled every month for the rest of her life, or so. It's what all of us pathetic humans do, who are left here and who are not princesses from a faraway kingdom, never to grow up or obey anyone or anything. I don't mind the airbrush on the wheel on this one that much, because it's a little weird to me that parts of her background appear to be so detailed. They are not. While the main focus in seems like a piece of butter in a pan. I also think that the dreaminess of it does this one a bit of a favor, forcing us to sympathize with Ophelia as she's sleeping. It feels like we are sleeping ourselves, as her shape becomes harder to make out, as well as the captain's. Yeah, that's all. The captain is finally killed once and for all. He attempts to break his watch and the moment of his death like he was told his father did, and he begins to ask them to tell his son that's when his father died, but Mercedes doesn't give in to his bullshit anymore. They won't let him break the watch, saying his son won't even know his name. And oh, that's so powerful. All he ever did for that family, for Ophelia and his mother, was to serve himself. He only loved his son, no one else. And even him he only loved because he saw him as his successor, as a possible means for him to live on even after he dies, to serve him and worship him even after there's no one present to love him anymore, because he needs to be loved. He can't function without being loved and worshipped. We know that. He only ruined everything for this family. He caused the mother's death by making her travel so late in pregnancy and by taking the mandrake root out from beneath her bed. He hurt and killed Ophelia directly. He was never a father nor a husband, not even a man. He deserves no memory or reassurance. Death was the best thing coming for him. I may have found this shot important because I tend to hold grudges, but something about the way they look like a menace that caused so much pain has lifted. Feels like so much more than just pain. This is not just victory against the captain, this is victory against fascism, the PM and the toad, the children suffering premature deaths, and fatherless homes. It's a victory against famine, war, and all that they bring that we can't escape because of our own mortality. Because we, regular humans like Mercedes, like the resistance, we cannot escape, just like how the doctor couldn't. But now there's nothing to escape from, for a while at least. Ophelia escaped. She lost nothing by being killed. It only served to prove her virtue. She was accepted to the kingdom finally, proven to be the lost daughter. But the queen bears the face of her own mother. If it isn't truly happening and it's all in her head, which is possible, then it's still truly happening because that's all that matters. It doesn't need to happen to anyone else. She's the only one we want this to happen for. No one else needs that kingdom. I mean, we all do, but she's the only one who needs this kingdom. And she's the only one who deserves it. No one else ever cared about the kingdom, just her and the phone. And all that matters is that she believes she's there, even if she really isn't. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out that Mercedes' lullaby took her there. The way the same melody plays when the story of the kingdom is told in the beginning, or when she walks down the steps of the labyrinth for the first time. It is the love of someone who knows disobedience is a virtue that takes her there. The love of someone inarguably real to not only love her as a mother but also see her as her own person, as Ophelia, not just my daughter or my wife's daughter. Her mother is still the queen of the kingdom, but without Mercedes' lullaby, she would have never believed she was worthy of the throne. And she still doesn't believe herself to be innocent, even though she clearly was. She's just a child in our eyes, but in her own, she's capable, and by being capable, she became impure to herself, less pure than a baby, at least. The baby who killed her mother, mind you. She had everything she needed to have: stubbornness, selflessness, intuition, love, courage, a certain kind of wisdom that children tend to possess, and lacked everything that could have stopped her in her journey. That's what makes her the princess we all want to be, and it's too late for us, but seeing her make it makes me infinitely happy. And I just feel like I am Mercedes watching her die. And the last shot is the same as the first one, but she's not scared anymore. Once she was sung the lullaby, she found her way back home, and there's no life behind her eyes anymore, but she's almost smiling, with just the faintest implication to us and to Mercedes that she's off to a better place. We see her horizontally here as opposed to the first one, meaning that the instability is gone, and so is the pain that comes with watching a child bleed out, since now we know that she wasn't killed, she was just laid to rest. Pan's Labyrinth is one of my favorite movies for many reasons. Its beauty and visual depth is one of them. As of now, I've only seen it 3 times, so I'm sure I'll pick up on a lot of other stuff on my later watches, but someone has to visually analyze Greece and Barbarian too, so, you know. Um, anyway, this journey was insane. Um, I'd be lying if I said I painted every day because I didn't, but whatever little time I had left in my days and my weeks, I poured into this project. One of my reasons for starting it in the first place was to learn and improve, but I would have never thought I'd make such insane improvements from just analyzing a single movie. It I haven't seen myself change and grow so rapidly since I was like 12, and by that I mean growing artistically. I haven't really made this much progress in such a small amount of time in a good while. And as I was painting, I also had some mental health stuff going on, and it's also helped me a lot with that, obviously. It kind of reminded me why I love painting and how fearless I was as a child, and how much hope I might still have left, even though I didn't have Ophelia's fate and I did end up growing up. I I feel like through her I I might have grown a little closer to my virtues as a child, with her reminding me of them. For me, this is a movie about hope and beauty and courage, and I just really needed this in my life. And the way that I paint was probably been changed forever, and I don't mind. I could have never anticipated such an amazing outcome. And I'd like to tell you again that if you haven't seen the movie yet, watch it. Shame on you, by the way, if you watched this entire video without watching the movie. If you have, I suggest you watch it again. And if I somehow manage to show you some things you didn't notice before or make you appreciate this movie any more than you already have, then that's just another purpose fulfilled. And I am so grateful that you stuck with me through this nightmare of a video. I hope it wasn't a nightmare to watch. Anyway, editing is kind of. But I really do appreciate you being here this whole time. And yeah, stay tuned for Greece and Barbarian and Adastra and whatever else I remember I love as movies. Yeah, I won't be stopping now. So thank you for your attention and have a good one. I've been Lapidosum. Bye.